AF activation, this determines whether or not the shutter will autofocus, or if you have to use the autofocus button. I leave it default. AF point illumination, this is a little light that the camera shines. If the subject is too dark, it will try and shine a light at it to allow the focus sensor to see it. I leave it set to auto, which is on. Focus point wraparound, that just means when you're adjusting a little bracket for where you want to focus and you're all the way to the right, you can hit right and it'll like wrap around to the left side. AF point selection, I use all 51 points. For D200 users, if they're used to 11, they can choose to use 11. Built-in, oops, what did I screwed up. AF point illumination. This is actually, when you're looking through the viewfinder, the area that's in focus will be a bold bracket and the rest won't. Illumination will turn that bracket to a illuminated red, and if it's set to auto, then it'll figure out when it needs to be red and when it needs to be black. If it's a very bright background, it won't turn it red because you won't see it anyway, so I leave it set to auto. AF, or built-in AF Illuminator. This is the light that shines a light at your target. It really only works with the focus in the center position, and only for like 10 or 15 feet. ISO sensitivity step value. This is the increments for changing exposure things. Easy exposure compensation. Don't really use it. Center weight area. This is when you're choosing center weight, you can pick how big the air diameter is. Fine-tune optimal exposure. So if you notice that your camera is always a little overexposed, you can use this to change the overall exposure settings. The little exposure icon on the LCD will not come on, like as if you were to, for example, use the exposure adjustment on the top of the camera. If you changed it off of the default, you'd have a little exposure icon that warns you that you're a different exposure. This lets you change it everywhere without having that annoying icon on the screen telling you that your exposure has been messed with. Shutter-realease. AEL button. I can't remember what this does, so I hit the little question mark. Choose whether exposure locks when the shutter release. Okay, so it's kind of like the autofocus button or choice. This lets you choose whether or not when you hold the shutter halfway down, the exposure is locked, or like if you focus on a dark object and then recompose a bright object, with this set to off, it will expose for the bright object, or try and get the entire scene in, as compared to just the dark object. Auto meter off delay, this lets you know, or this sets how long it takes the meter to turn off. Self timer delay, pretty obvious. Monitor off delay, obvious. Beep, pretty obvious. Viewfinder grid display, I like to turn this on so that I can see the screen in third, so that you have your composition, because images tend to look better if you've got the subject 1/3 off the center. You can look that up, that's rule of thirds. It also makes it easy to ensure that you have the camera level. You can compare it to the background. Viewfinder warning display, that lets you see warnings in the viewfinder. I leave it default. This is continuous low-speed shooting mode. Default is 3 frames per second, but you can set it to whatever you want, from 1 to 7. Of course, without the battery grip, it'll only go to 6 frames per second. It goes to 7 in here, so that with the battery grip, you can choose 7 if you want. Max continuous release means it'll let you shoot 100 continuous shots before it stops. File number sequence, shooting info on display. I turn this to auto. This means if you take a picture of something bright, the letters will be black, and if you take a picture of something black, the letters will be white. That's all that means. LCD illumination is pretty obvious. Actually, I'll mention it. If you hit any button, this will turn the light on the LCD. Otherwise, you have to use the LCD on button, which is built into the off-on switch. Exposure delay mode. This is if you have it on a tripod and the vibrations from the shutter opening are causing the camera to shake and blur your picture. This will take a picture 1 second after the shutter opens, and then a regular exposure after that. Battery order determines which batteries are used first when you have the grip attached. Flash sync speeds, pretty obvious. You can increase this above 250 to 320th of a second. But when you think about flash sync, your subject is only going to be exposed for as much light that you have. And if all of the light that you're using is coming from the flash, then the exposure is effectively going to be as long as the flash is illuminating the subject, which typically is very short. The SB800 at full power is 1/900th of a second. The at half power, it's half that. So the exposure is pretty short. Doesn't matter what the camera shutter speed is set to. If you're lighting the object for less than the shutter is open, it's only going to be exposed for as long as there's light. Let's go back to metering. Okay, flash shutter speed. This is the shutter the camera will be at if you have the flash enabled by default. Flash control for built-in flash. This is what you use to have wireless control of either an SB600 or an SB800. What you do is you go down to commander mode, and then you can set individually the power of each flash group. You can have up to 3 if you include the one built into the camera. So if you want to turn the on-camera flash off so that only your external flashes are used, you just hit the up arrow until you get the dash dash. M is manual mode, T is TTL. Then your compensation for how much of that flash contributes to the overall exposure. Here's group A, which you can also set to manual or TTL or AA if the flash supports it. And you can set the exposure compensation for that. So you can have up to 2 remote flash groups. Each flash group can have up to 3 flashes. And the built-in flash, which you can either have contributing to the exposure or not contributing to the exposure, which will mean it'll be as if it didn't fire. Channel defaults to 1 when you get the camera. The flashes that you buy default to 3, so I move it to channel 3. And then you have to hit OK to save the changes. Otherwise, if you just hit back arrow, they'll be erased. Now I have it set to flash